Hey there again, got another live style video going for you. This is a topic that has been requested a little bit, but was something that I was planning on doing anyway. And that is my personal history with the Pokemon franchise, talking TCG, games, anime, everything. And it's something that I've been giving a lot of thought about, kind of reminiscing and getting nostalgic for. And so to see where it all began, you really have to go back to 1998, 1999 in America when Pokemon was first coming over and Pokemania was in full swing. Most of you watching the channel were probably a part of this. I'm not really sure when Pokemon really hit other countries, if it was all at the same time. It just spread out from Japan and hit everywhere all at once. But I know here in America that it came in like a storm. One day, Pokemon was nothing. No one had heard of it. And then it seemed like the next week, it was everything. It was on every kid's mind. You couldn't get away from it. It was everywhere. And people today say, like, yeah, well, like Pokemon goes popular. People like Pokemon and stuff. You don't understand. In 1999, you really could not get away from it. I mean, Poliwhirl was on the cover of Time magazine for Pokemania. And for me personally, I can remember Pokemon ruled every single aspect of my life. I would have been 8 or 9 years old at the time, and my first exposure to it was through the anime. It came on Kids WB, and I just happened to catch it on. I was like, what, what is this? And instantly addicted. It may have been the first anime I ever watched, even before like Dragon Ball Z or Sailor Moon or any of that stuff had really popped up on Toonami. I was introduced to Pokemon. Back in the late 90s, at least for me, living in a very rural part of Kentucky, anime was something like, I'd never seen anything like it before. Just the style of animation, these quirky little things that American cartoons just didn't have, and that really appealed to me. I got sucked in, and it seems like right at the same time as when I would go to school and everyone had Pokemon cards. And so the anime came first, and second came the TCG. So it was all about collecting, getting those holographic cards, uh, you know, collecting them all. You got to catch them all, got to collect them all, getting every single piece of TCG merchandise I could find. Remembering back on opening packs, I remember the one holographic card I could not get was Nidoking. I just could not pull it from packs. I ended up with maybe a full playset of first edition Charizards before I ever pulled a Nidoking from a pack. It was just a really strange thing happening there. As the TCG moved forward, I was collecting, I was watching the anime, and then that's when I got into the games. At the time, I didn't know that, the games came first and then everything spread from there. For me, it was the third thing I came to. I would see other kids playing and go, oh, that, it looks like a lot of fun. And so I wanted to go get a Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Color was still relatively new, and I wanted at least one Pokemon game. The goal was like, yeah, I got to get red version, blue version, yellow version. I got to get pinball, trading card game. And, for a 9-year old, you don't really think about how much money that is. But thankfully, I had a grandma that was very indulgent of my interests and was just like, yep, let's go get you whatever this stuff is that you want. And so we went about 30 minutes to the nearest kind of like city or town, whatever you would call it, in Kentucky, and went up to the Kmart. And I had in my mind I was going to get the teal Game Boy. That was my favorite one I had seen, and I was going to get red version because fuck yeah, Charizard. That's my favorite Pokemon at the time. And we got there. They only had one color of Game Boy, which was the yellow Game Boy Color. And, looking back, I'm kind of glad I got this one. I really enjoy this as a game system. And they did not have any Pokemon Red. Instead, what they had was blue version. So maybe just settling a little bit on those two, but the gaming experience didn't change. I played the shit out of Pokemon Blue. Later on, I was able to get red version and yellow version, played the shit out of those. Would play all the way to the end, delete a save file, start all over again, and just replayed those games a lot. You can see actually back there in the background too, when the Switch Lite released, and it was the same yellow dandelion as the Game Boy Color. Like, yeah, I'm going to get one of those. Too nostalgic not to. And what ended up happening is just because I wanted to consume all of the Pokemon media that I could, I picked up the TCG on the Game Boy and ended up learning how to actually play the card game from that Game Boy cartridge. And I would go to school and be like, oh yeah, I built this new deck. I'm using this card and this card. And the other kids had no idea what I was talking about. None of them had ever considered what all of the text on the card actually meant. They just assumed, like since Charizard had the highest HP, that it was the best one, that Chansey must have been just as good because it had high HP, and no one really cared about the attack costs or deck building at all. And so it was really hard to actually find other kids to play the Pokemon TCG with. Instead, I had to just content myself with playing on the Game Boy version and kind of figuring out which cards were best that way, which decks were best, and really discovering how deck building worked in general, which I'm really glad that I did because the TCG became such a big part of my life continuing forward, all the way up until creating this channel. And not just with Pokemon, but also, deck building skills spread across card games. And I've played a lot of different card games over the years as well. In my area, since it was very rural, there were a lot of little pop-up unofficial events that I would go to, and I would play decks that I'd built against other kids in these small little tournaments. I remember going to one in particular. It was right after Fossil had come out, and there was kind of that lull between Fossil and Rocket, where Rocket had released in Japan, and some of those cards had made their way over. And at that time, people were still calling them like Evil Vaporeon and Evil Gyarados. And I remember getting the Rocket set Eevee and Rattata and just going like, holy shit, these cards aren't even out yet. They're in a different language. Apparently these are like evil Pokemon now. This is incredible. And it turns out, those are 10-cent cards. By the time, it was such a big deal when a new set came out, because you, as a kid, never thought about like, oh yeah, they're just going to keep pumping these out forever. There's constantly going to be new cards coming out, let alone any conception of, oh yeah, they might make more Pokemon at some point. But yeah, doing these small tournaments, so I did get to play against actual people every now and then, but not very often. Those were very limited. I believe around this time, either that Christmas or the year after, is when my sister and I got an N64 for Christmas. And I consider myself lucky to be alive and that age at that specific point in time, because receiving an N64 for Christmas was just amazing. It came in this huge box that like was as big as you were for a 9-year-old, and it was 3D games, this new concept that was really hitting. And this was before Pokemon Stadium came out. I think we just had like Super Mario 64 and maybe like NASCAR 99 were the only games we had on it at the time. But when the first Stadium game came out, and then you have Pokemon Snap, of course, just gobbled those up because they had the word Pokemon on them, and kind of got into the more competitive scene and transferring Pokemon over from the Game Boy to Stadium, just to try to get through that very difficult game, especially for a 9-year-old. And this would have also been around the time that Pokemon the first movie was hitting theaters. And so when I say that Pokemon ruled every aspect of my life, I really mean it. Like, this movie was coming out, I was super hype about that. I was going to Burger King and just buying kids' meals just to get, Pokemon merchandise, trying to collect all of that stuff. I had the VHS tapes, constantly watching and rewatching the anime, tuning in on Saturday mornings to get those new episodes, collecting cards still, playing Stadium and Snap, later Hey You Pikachu, even though I really actually hated that game when it came out, replaying the Game Boy games, trying to build up teams and catch new Pokemon to send over to Stadium. I was drawing constantly from the anime, looking at the illustrations on Pokemon cards and trying to replicate those styles, which is really also how I learned how to draw. I was so motivated by Pokemon to learn how to maybe create these little monsters for myself that I would just sit and draw these things all day. And that's really how I picked up, I'm not a great artist or anything, but any drawing ability I have came from Pokemon, because I just wanted to replicate this this incredible art that I had never even seen the likes of before, and try to make versions of that for myself, like pin up on my bedroom walls and stuff. I remember getting the soundtracks for like the first movie, and that To Be a Master soundtrack I ended up getting for Christmas from another relative. Had the posters on my wall. Pretty sure I had like Pokemon pillowcases or whatever. Like I was all in for this, and to say the least, that left a huge impact on my life to where even here in 2020, I'm still talking about Pokemon. Pokemon is still a huge topic, and there's so much stuff, even from just like 1999, that I still want to talk about because it was just an explosion of merchandise and media. And so, if you were part of Pokemania back then, it is hard to describe to a person who kind of came to Pokemon later on that no, you don't understand. This thing was enormous. It was everything. You couldn't go to school without everyone wanting to talk about Pokemon. Pokemon cards were banned at my school because kids would just want to trade them all day and just look at them all day. It matters worse, if you weren't at school, you didn't have anyone to talk to about Pokemon. The internet was in its very early days. You could find some stuff on Pokemon. I'm pretty sure I happened upon Cerebi.net way back then, but finding information on what new sets were coming out or what new games, everything news related to Pokemon was extremely hard to find. You really had to go to just like a Walmart or a drugstore and try to find these magazines, like TCG Collector or Beckett Pokemon Collector, Nintendo Power, and even then the information was really limited. Summertime came around over those course of a few years. I would volunteer for summer school just so I could go and spend time with other kids and talk about Pokemon. These were right after the Rocket sets had finally come to America, and so Dark Charizard was all the rage, Dark Blastoise, and people were building decks. We would play at summer school. When we would get released outside, a lot of kids would run out straight over to the baseball diamond, but me and a bunch of other kids would hit those picnic tables and just play Pokemon. Try to trade cards, talk about deck building. At that point in time, I had found a few people that had also played the Game Boy game and they knew how to play. And so we did share some tips that way. Soon after those Rocket cards were released, the Pokemon craze really started to die down. I would say that's the point where Pokemania really started to decline, is around the time between the first movie and Pokemon 2000 and after those Rocket cards were released. When Pokemon 2000 came out, I remember everyone still being very excited. Nowhere near as much as they were for the first movie, but a lot of kids did line up just to get those promo cards that came with the movie tickets. The kids that were part of that initial Pokemania craze were starting to move on to other things. The Pokemon cards were starting to kind of lose their luster because there were so many at this point. You had your gym sets coming out, and at this point in time, I wasn't playing the TCG anymore. All of my friends that did had already moved on to other things, and I would go to flea markets, which was the only place you could really pick up single cards. I'd hit up some of these stalls that would have single cards, try to get the holographic ones, but it was really hard to find Gym Heroes and Gym Challenge packs. And that also really hurt the TCG craze and made a lot of people fall off because you couldn't find them as easy as you could those base through Rocket packs that were just all over the place. You couldn't go to a checkout at a supermarket without finding those cards. And I myself was starting to fall off of that craze too, but then Gold and Silver hit, and they were the best games I'd ever played at that point. I remember getting Silver version and immediately going home and playing for like a solid 5 or 6 hours and just being like, holy shit, it's nighttime, and it's nighttime in the game too. And that's probably one of the reasons that nighttime Goldenrod City in Gen 2 is just one of my favorite gaming experiences of all time. Just that atmosphere and kind of the place I was in my life as a kid and experiencing that has still stuck with me to this day. I can remember just going like, oh man, Goldenrod City, and it seemed so big at the time, and there were so many things to explore. And I remember I had to go to bed though and get up for school the next day. My parents were mad that I'd just been playing video games all evening. I remember thinking to myself at the time, I was like, man, I really wish these new Pokemon had Pokemon cards, because I'd really like to get back into collecting those Pokemon cards. And I went on a family vacation to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And this is just like a big vacation spot for families in the South. Really, it's in the Smoky Mountains. And I remember going to an As Seen on TV shop. I don't know why we ended up stopping there, but I was looking around, and then I see these Pokemon cards that I'd never seen before. And they were sealed in this plastic little bag, exactly like this. I had the Japanese writing at the top, and you could kind of see through the binder there. And I remember thinking, those are the new Pokemon. They made Pokemon cards for the new Pokemon. And I'll be doing a video on those premium Neo files at another point in time, but that blew my mind. And I bought it, opened it up, and I was like, oh man, I just paid $10 for this weird folder that you could only see 3 cards of. And when you opened it up, it's got 3 holographic cards. It had the Feraligatr, Typhlosion, and Meganium in there. So I was completely revved up again. It's Pokemania Part 2 for me. And I remember taking that folder back to school and being like, look at this. And other kids not caring. They kind of moved on to other more mature things like chicken fighting or riding a 4-wheeler. Stuff that wasn't, that baby Pokemon stuff anymore. I did feel a little down at the time, because this had opened up so many new avenues and venues for interests and hobbies for me. I started with the anime with Pokemon, and that spread out into me watching a lot more anime, because then you had Dragon Ball Z and Digimon, and then like Sailor Moon and Gundam and all this stuff hitting American TVs right after. And that's something that I continue to do until today. Like, still a huge anime fan, still a huge fan of Dragon Ball and stuff, but watching a lot more seasonal anime now. Stuff like Crunchyroll and the Funimation app have made it really easy to keep up with simulcasts and stuff. And that has kind of come back around, where people I know that way back then had abandoned it and said, like, yeah, that's stupid baby stuff, have come back on it. And then, the TCG had completely opened up card games for me and tabletop games, which have been another huge part of my life. After Pokemon, I went on to play, I think Digimon was kind of in between Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And then later on got into a bunch more stuff. And then the video games. Pokemon were the first video games I played. My sister had one of the big gray brick style Game Boys, one of the original ones that I'd played, like Donkey Kong Country and Legend of Zelda on, but not really dived really deep into video games until Pokemon Red and Blue version. And from there on, I was just hooked on RPGs. I was hooked on video games. There was no turning back from there. And that's still a huge part of my life too. Like, really, I spend all of my time on video games, reading, watching anime, or some other form of sci-fi or fantasy television, or talking about trading card games here on this channel or with other people. So to see that kind of disappear all around me when I was a kid made me think, like, well, maybe I should just stop all of this stuff and find something else to do, because even though I'm still interested, no one else is. But luckily, I was a stubborn, stupid kid, and so I just kept collecting the Pokemon stuff. I kept watching the anime, spread my interest, started watching other anime, and eventually I did find other people who had done the same, that went to other schools. Where my family went back to Pigeon Forge. My dad just got free tickets to stuff from the company he worked at, and so we ended up going back to that same As Seen on TV store, and lo and behold, they had done it again. They made another folder with some just badass reverse holofoil cards in there. You got Entei, Charizard. Kind of the end of an era for me too. Neo Discovery was the last set that I really collected for and bought packs for consistently. After that, I would still keep up with the TCG. I was still getting, like Beckett's Pokemon Collector and seeing the new cards that had come out. But at this point, there were shiny cards coming out that were super rare and also super expensive. And so it was really discouraging when you want to collect them all and get them all, but some of the cards were $100. I remember seeing shiny Gyarados and just thinking it was the coolest thing. I hadn't really seen card art like that yet. The format of the card was cool, but at the time, I remember seeing like the value was over $100. I was like, well, I'm never going to get that. So I did keep up all the way up through Neo and the e-reader sets, but that was kind of it for me. I had stopped collecting. At that point, I'd also stopped watching the anime. I had kind of grown stale from it, from the Pokemon franchise as a whole. And so I pretty much just dropped off. This was also around the time that Yu-Gi-Oh was really starting to become big. And to my surprise, there were kids at my school that were collecting Yu-Gi-Oh and actually playing it because the nature of that anime actually showed how to play the game to a certain extent. People were interested in playing. Other kids wanted to build decks and play Yu-Gi-Oh. So I immediately took a 90-degree turn straight away from Pokemon and straight into Yu-Gi-Oh. I was in 7th or 8th grade that Yu-Gi-Oh was really gaining in popularity. That was the new thing that you would get home from school and watch the episodes. Looking back, didn't realize how terrible those episodes actually were, but the card game was pretty rad. It had kind of these hardcore monsters that had swords, and there were dragons with spikes and cannons and stuff. And so it was kind of seen as cooler than Pokemon. And so it was okay for even a 7th or an 8th grader to be partaking in this card game, even though Pokemon had become uncool just a couple years earlier. And I was aware that new Pokemon games had come out for the Game Boy Advance. I don't think I had a Game Boy Advance yet at that point because I'd also really just lost interest in playing the Pokemon games. But as Yu-Gi-Oh kind of went on, they had something that Pokemon didn't at the time, and that was video games galore. I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh on Game Boy Advance, on PS2, on GameCube, and so if you couldn't find kids to play with the physical cards, you could go home and play Yu-Gi-Oh on multiple platforms. And so for me, my interest in trading card games spiked again. I was playing a ton of Yu-Gi-Oh, especially at home. And the GameCube version, there was one where it was more like a tabletop board, and you would move your monsters around. I don't really remember the name of that one, but that kind of filled a different niche for me, more of that role-playing tabletop one. My favorite Yu-Gi-Oh game to play then was the one that kind of emulated the Battle City tournament. This was around the time that like Jinzo and Vorse Raider and Gemini Elf had really become the go-to cards, and so I was really into that at the time. But one thing that was really common amongst us grade schoolers was we would get our parents to buy us some Game Boy Advance games, and we would just play them and replay them until we were bored with them. And the one I'd replayed so much was Gradius. I fucking love Gradius on Game Boy Advance. And I remember, I was going like, yeah, I've played it a lot, and I'm wanting to trade it for something new. And another kid had a Pokemon Ruby version. And so I was like, oh yeah, I remember, liking Pokemon. I'll go in on Ruby version. And instantly I was like, oh yeah, I love this. Why did I ever turn my back on Pokemon? And so I played Ruby version a lot, picked up Sapphire. And around this time, I was going into high school. And so I got to high school, and you have all of these new people around you. You're not really sure. You're trying to look cool for everybody. But as it went on, I was taking honors classes and instantly found out like, oh yeah, there's a ton of people in here that have experienced all these same things as me. They're whipping out Game Boy Advances and just like hatching eggs in Sapphire version while we're at lunch. And so became very quick, close friends with a lot of these people. And we got into the games. We were trading Pokemon a lot. We were helping each other finish the Pokedex. And we did talk a lot about the Pokemon trading card game. Like, oh yeah, we used to collect these. I still have a bunch of cards and all those kinds of things. And at that point, we had all played Pokemon. We had all played Yu-Gi-Oh. But then there was this like highly strategic, much deeper card game, which was Magic the Gathering. And when we were in high school, this was around the end of Kamigawa block. For those of you that have played Magic, that kind of gives you a time era of which we were playing, and it was right before Ravnica block. And so as soon as Ravnica block hit, I remember everyone being super excited and me going, okay, I'm going to learn this. I love card games. This seems right up my alley. And I became obsessed with Magic the Gathering. So this was kind of my third phase of trading card games where it was just like, yep, going to buy packs, going to head down to the card shop, see what singles I can pick up. Around this time, there were more kind of niche shops popping up. For the first time ever, there was a comic book shop. I had been reading comics for a few years then and had a really hard time finding them. I had to get them through the mail through Marvel and DC subscription services. But all of a sudden, we had a comic shop and we had a game shop. And although it was a 30-minute drive away, it was worth it because for the first time, we could go gather in groups. Uh, and you had this close friend group you had official competitive play where it was like you were playing for real. It was also a time when the internet was highly accessible. You could just go online and find what decks people were using. Net decking became a huge thing. As it's a common thing for people that have played a lot of trading card games, but you typically kind of hold the golden era of whatever card game it is whenever you were playing it the most. And so for me, Ravnica block was the golden era of Magic the Gathering. I really love Mirrodin block and Kamigawa block, and then especially Ravnica. I think all three of those were just peak Magic, in my opinion. I did drop off pretty fast after the release of Cold Snap, so that gives you another indicator, kind of the period I was playing in there. But also, as weird as it seems, I was starting to get nostalgic for Pokemon around this time. And I'd seen on a website that they were now producing World Champs decks, where they would take the World Champion winners and basically reprint their exact decks in an unofficial format. So the backs of the cards were not official Pokemon for tournament play. Instead, it would say like World Champion 2003 or 4, whatever it was. And I remember going, oh, that's really cool. And then I saw that there had just been a Tyranitar deck that won Worlds. Tyranitar was one of my favorite Pokemon, so I ordered that deck and got it and realized that the card game had really changed. There were supporter cards now, and Pokemon had more attacks. The card layouts were different, and I got really interested in it again, but I didn't know anyone else that was playing Pokemon anymore. Everyone was playing Magic, and so I bought a couple of the World Champs decks and just kind of fiddled with them on my own time and would kind of play against myself with them. And then one day, just out of the blue, one of my friends, William, brought a Pokemon deck to school and was just like, hey guys, have you seen what the new Pokemon is like? And it was the Delta Species Feraligatr theme deck. And it was a lightning type. And for me, that was just like, no pun intended, but lightning striking and going, Pokemon is different now. It was like a breath of fresh air to see like, oh, they're doing something different and new with the TCG where a Feraligatr can be a lightning type now. And so the Delta species aspect of that really piqued my interest, and I think the same for my entire group of friends because we all went out and bought those same Delta species theme decks. That Feraligatr theme deck was from Dragon Frontier, I believe, was the EX set. And that's another thing is we had no idea that EX Pokemon were even a thing because we had dropped off before they were integrated into sets. And so we completely backlogged. We wanted to know what the entire competitive format was at the time. So we went all the way back through like Unseen Forces, Delta Species, Holland Phantoms, and kind of looked at what the decks were for each of those, where those decks were now, what people were using at official tournaments. And at this point in time, we could drive. We had cars. And so we could just load up and go to any tournament we wanted to. And since my friend group, we were all playing together and we were going to these official events together, we decided that we were going to be a team and that we needed a team name. And so we came up with Team Pony, PWNY, because we were going to pwn some noobs at Pokemon. Halo was a big thing, and the word pwn was being thrown around a lot, so we thought it was funny. And we went to these tournaments and played and kind of got better as a group. We would pull all of our cards together. That way, we would kind of exchange, like, oh, yeah, this guy's got all the cards this weekend. He's going to do some deck building, or let's all meet up at this certain house this weekend and we'll do some deck building. We were able to play test a lot of cards, and I think we came to the TCG at the right time because Dragon Frontiers had a lot of huge, powerful cards in it that really changed that metagame. And so coming in right as Dragon Frontiers was releasing, we were able to really kind of play test through a lot of really good stuff. I don't remember ever playing a really good deck myself. I wasn't the best player in the group really, but I really enjoyed playing and deck building. And so I remember trying like Imprison Gardevoir Delta, tried to build the Delta Species Tyranitar deck that was a Lightning type and couldn't really make that one work. I think that was the one with the Shockwave counters. Played a Fire type Delta Arbok deck for a while. It's a lot of different stuff that never really stuck. I was trying new ideas. We ended up going to the state championships that year for Kentucky, and my friend Will, who had first kind of reintroduced us all to Pokemon by bringing that theme deck to school, he ended up taking second place, I believe. He was using a Psychic type Delta Flagon EX with Shiftry in it, which is a ridiculous deck. It was not an archetype at the time, but I'm pretty sure he ended up taking second place. Got a really cool like crystal trophy for it. I was trying to remember. I was using Flariados at the time. It's Flareon EX with the Unseen Forces Ariados, and ended up doing pretty well, but did not make final cut. When Diamond and Pearl released on DS, we were kind of all on the same page. We all picked it up day one, played through it really quick. We were trading back and forth. Really excited about the Diamond and Pearl TCG sets, so when those came out, we were still hitting up official events, speculating ahead of time because now we had scans and translations ahead of time, so you could kind of deck build and play test these decks using proxies before the cards even hit the shelves, which is really cool and was really new for us at the time. And so we were kind of play testing through a lot of Diamond and Pearl stuff. Played a little bit of Infercaddy, which was this really gimmicky Delcatty EX Infernape deck. Really tried to make Quick Attune work, but it was never really powerful enough to contend with these EX cards. And we decided we were going to go to the Pokemon National Championships that year. They were in Columbus, Ohio at Origins Game Fair, which I'd never been to a TCG or tabletop convention at that point. Had never been to a competitive event that big. I mean, it was huge. So we load up, we go to Columbus, Ohio. There's like 6 or 7 of us packed into one hotel room, so we were all sleep deprived, but we were ready to go. We all kind of had our signature deck ready to go. And then I think at last minute, one of our friends, Jesse, who, commented on the channel, I'm sure he'll have some great input about his time spent on Team Pony. But he was running a Banat EX deck, which was really sleek and smooth. I really loved the deck, but it wasn't what I was using at the time. I don't even remember what I was using, what I was going to try to take to nationals. But I remember last minute he said, I'm not going to use this deck. Do you want to use Banat? And I said, hell yeah, man. I love this deck. But, as play testing it, kind of realized that it had a huge weakness, and that was Shuppets on the bench were very susceptible to sniping, particularly from Empoleon. Empoleon was a deck at the time that could completely destroy Banat EX, because if the Shuppets didn't get sniped, you could completely roll your opponent with Banat EX on turn 3. And that's what I enjoyed about it, is I didn't like playing these drawn out games. I would rather On turn 3, I've already won or I've already lost, and then I could just get up, go to the next table, find my next opponent, and that's uh, why I was so interested in Banat EX. And so I pretty much said, yeah, let's kind of go scope out the competition before the event really started. You could kind of see what people were practicing against each other with. And I remember walking around, and about half the decks I saw were Empoleon decks. And so I pretty much decided day 0 of the national championships that I wasn't going to play. I was just like, there's no reason going into this with Banat when I'm going to lose. It was an auto loss against Empoleon. I didn't have any real good techs to put in the deck for that. And so I ended up going to the national championship and not even playing. We ended up selling a lot of our Pokemon collection while we were there in Columbus. And so we kind of came back empty-handed. Everyone still had the decks they had built, but for the most part, like all of the commons, uncommons, rares, a lot of the holo rares we had, we did not leave with. We ended up selling them there and kind of distributing the money amongst the team members. And after that, we didn't really play as much Pokemon TCG. We kind of lost that competitive edge. We were still playing a lot of the DS games, and we were still playing a lot of Pokemon, but kind of after that, our time was spread even more amongst TCG games. Right before Lost Millennium and Cybernetic Revolution had come out in Yu-Gi-Oh!, which were kind of a revitalization of that franchise as well. And so for a good chunk of time, we were all playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, and Magic on a competitive level all at the same time. Never went to any Yu-Gi-Oh! Events. Those were a pretty rare occurrence around this time. I remember going to Pokemon events, and people would also pull out their Yu-Gi-Oh! Game mats and decks and play against each other. And a lot of it, I was lost because I hadn't kept up with the competitive side of Yu-Gi-Oh! For so long. But we all did pick up, just like structured decks and would play those against each other. Had a lot of fun playing all these different types of TCG. And then we all graduated high school. And most of Team Pony all ended up going to the same college. And so we all lived together. So it was like 24/7 Team Pony action in this dorm room. But around this time, right before Platinum came out, both the game and the set. And so Stormfront was really kind of that last hurrah for me and for a lot of people that had been playing Pokemon with me at that time. So when that set came out, we were still deck building, but not really going to events. We were still playing against each other, but not really on a competitive level. It was just really for fun. But we also kind of got consumed with college life and adjusting to a new setting and picking up new interests. At this time, we were all playing a lot of Halo 3, and that was kind of the big thing we did together. Revisiting Dragon Ball Z, this is when those orange brick sets were coming out, so we were constantly rewatching DBZ together, but kind of lost interest in all of these different TCGs. So I was no longer playing Magic at the time. Kind of the shine of the Elemental Heroes gimmick had fallen off of Yu-Gi-Oh! And so I dropped off of that. Pokemon was kind of the last one. And I even dropped off of that. I didn't pick up Platinum when it released at the time. Didn't really keep an interest in any of the TCG after that. And so I had fallen off of Pokemon once again for the second time. I didn't even think about TCG at all. Instead, what I'd done is just focused on playing video games. Had been playing a lot of Halo. Halo Reach and Borderlands had come out around the time, was straight up my alley. Those were my jam. Still are today. But one of the big things was when Magic the Gathering Duel of the Planeswalkers on Xbox 360 dropped, I fell back into that and was instantly just like, hell yeah, love Magic. I'm glad this is a thing now. Since a lot of my friends have kind of moved on, I can play online. So I did a lot of playing Duels of the Planeswalkers online, and that was kind of my jam for a little bit. I got back into collecting Magic the Gathering. This was a time where I was basically buying cards and mailing them to artists. And I don't know if Magic artists still do this a lot, but they would sign the cards and just mail them back to you. It's kind of collector's items. And so that's what I was into then, kind of moving into adulthood, moving away from competitive play and more back to the collector's side. But even then, I still kind of fell off Magic right after that, especially going into grad school, where at this point, I didn't even have time for video games. I was constantly grading papers or writing papers or just being consumed with school. And so I had sold off my video game systems. A lot of my games I'd already sold at that point. I was having a hard time keeping up with comics, which is another one of my interests. Didn't really have time for casual reading anymore. And so this is a kind of a void period in my life where I completely fell off all of my hobbies. I have completely missed black and white versions, black and white 2. And so my first year of grad school, I had a month long Christmas break and I had no plans. And so I said, I'm going back in on Pokemon. I've seen some of the designs because this was around the time I think like Mega Mewtwo and like the Mega starters had been revealed, but not much else. And I was thinking I'm going to go back in on this for Christmas. So I bought a 3DS and I bought X version, and that was kind of my reintroduction into Pokemon for the third time. And so playing through X version, I was being introduced to all of the Gen 5 and the Gen 6 Pokemon at the same time because I had been in such an academic void up until that point and just remembered how much I loved everything. Just really got back into competitive breeding and battling online once I'd finished X version. Went back and played Black and White 2, and then I was thinking, now's a great time to actually see what the TCG has become. And so with the first X and Y sets, I actually got online and looked at the scans to see what cards were coming out, was kind of brainstorming what was going to be competitive, and picked up a few packs, kind of the structured decks, and played around a little bit. Didn't do anything too competitively because I was still finishing grad school. I was getting ready to move from Kentucky to California, which was a huge thing. Saving as much money as I could, spending a lot of time trying to finish my internships and log in hours so that I could graduate grad school and move. And so once I made it to California, I really backlogged and realized that Pokemon trading card game online was a thing where you didn't have to buy the physical cards. You could just play through the game, get coins, trade in for packs, build your own decks. Especially when Phantom Forces released, I got back into the TCG in a huge way, was playing constantly online. Really got back into it that way. And around this time is when I kind of started formulating how I wanted to do this channel. I was watching a lot of other YouTube channels. In those last few months before I left Kentucky, me and my friend group I had there, we would go to these peddlers malls, which were basically people could rent a booth and put whatever they wanted in there. And this peddlers mall would sell it, and the mall would get a little bit of the cut from the booth. And we went and we found these theme decks from base set, Jungle, Fossil, and Rocket. And we were like, oh, this is really cool. Like, we got these really cheap decks, sealed, still in package. And, they did have some booster packs and stuff too. So we bought them on a whim, went back, played against each other. And we were like, oh, yeah, we remember how fun this was, back in 1999, playing these cards against each other. And we all felt huge nostalgia for it. Started reordering cards from like base Rocket and building these decks in a little format of our own and playing against each other a lot. And this is around the time where I started net decking base set era decks, where I was going, oh wait, I have the internet now. I can kind of go back and see what the best decks were and build them now and kind of compare them to what I thought was good as a kid, which there was some overlap, but for the most part, I was wrong. I was wrong about a lot of decks as a kid. What was considered good then didn't even compare to a lot of the major archetypes that I didn't know about. I started to formulate in my head how I would do it. If I was a YouTuber and I wanted to create content about classic formats and what Pokemon was like in the late 90s and early 2000s when I played a lot, even I was thinking, like, oh man, I wish people still talked about those EX era decks when I was playing a lot. And pretty much came up with the idea of like, oh yeah, well, if I learn how to do video editing, I already have all of these cards. All I have to do is kind of video myself with these cards and throw it up on YouTube, and then suddenly there would be content for this. And so I created Drunk Shuckle, which was really just a combination of my drinking habits and my favorite Pokemon. This was a weird time in my life where I was drinking a full bottle of wine every day, which I don't recommend. This channel has really motivated me to dig through those really old websites that I used to use back in like 2000 and kind of, relearn what was going on at the time, kind of remember what it was like to play back then, what decks were big, what people were talking about, and also just research everything else that was going on that I didn't know about from back then. So now I'm here, neck deep in Pokemon content. Once again, got a Sword and Shield TCG sets coming out soon that I'm strangely excited for. I'd really fallen off of the TCG. Just once again, thanks for everybody. Thanks for listening to my history with Pokemon. And I feel like a lot of people are going to have similar stories to tell, and I really want to hear those. So please, like, if you had your own particular Pokemon stories that you want to share, throw them down there in the comments. I love reading that kind of stuff. I like hearing from other people, kind of how they came to Pokemon, and then how it's developed, how the fandom has developed over the years. At what point did you join the Pokemon fandom, or at any points did you fall off and come back to it like I did? And also, how did you happen upon this channel? What was it that interested you in kind of this classic Pokemon content? All the above. I would love to hear down below. So until next video,